Hey everybody. Welcome to my channel, I just read it. Today I have some stories that I hope you enjoy. If you like this channel and the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, and click on the notification button. Thanks. I appreciate every one of you. Kevin story number 1. Posted by u/LeoDGTV. 14 hours ago. Kevin is the worst roommate ever. So, a bit of backstory, I'm an RA for those of you who don't know. That means I live in a dorm at my university, and I'm in charge of an entire floor of college students, mostly freshmen. I run events, decorate the floor with bulletin boards and door decorations, handle roommate conflicts, etc. Well, this year was probably the most interesting roommate conflict I've had to handle. So around week 5 of the semester, I get a message on Discord from one of my residents, let's call him Andy. Andy asks me if we can talk, and that it's kind of personal, so he'd rather talk in person. I'm not overly excited about having my kids be in my room/personal space, less so because of COVID, but I thought what the hell, it's probably important. So, Andy comes to my room the next day to talk, and he starts by explaining that he has been having issues with his roommate, Kevin. The way Andy is describing it sounds like it's typical stuff. You know, playing music too loud, playing video games, and yelling really loud at all hours of the night, talking in the middle of Andy's classes, etc. Normally this wouldn't be that big of a deal, but since classes are all online this semester, it's really hard to be able to focus in the middle of class or a test when your roommate can't take a hint when you're ignoring his attempts to talk to you. After talking with him some more, I could tell he was so stressed about this, I could literally feel the catharsis of him venting. Apparently, this had been happening for the entire 5 weeks school had been in session, and Andy had tried every possible thing he could to make things work with Kevin and to settle the conflict without my help. As much as I appreciated the sentiment, helping with roommate conflicts is my job, and he should have come to me much sooner, and I made sure to tell him as much. I told him we should start with a roommate contract so that he, and I, could enforce some mutual guidelines the two of them put down. I sent him the PDF of the contract, and within hours he had sent a filled-out copy to me and informed me that Kevin had agreed to sign it. I got curious and decided to look over the roommate agreement to try and see what rules they put down. Most of them were normal. Lights out at midnight, don't leave food out, take out the trash when it's full, wear headphones when playing music or video games, etc. But at the bottom of the page, in the other section of the agreement, there were some interesting additions. For example, don't turn off the other roommate's fan at night, or don't talk to the other during a quiz or exam. And then I got hit with a couple of doozies. Like don't lock the door if the other is going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and don't show your roommate an open wound. It was at that moment I realized we were dealing with a Kevin. A couple of days later, Andy asked to speak with me again, and it was here that he explained that all of the weirdly specific rules were directed specifically at Kevin. Andy had woken up at 2 a.m. one night, and went to the bathroom, and when he returned, the door had been locked. Kevin woke up, realized Andy was gone, and thought it would be a good idea to lock the door and then go back to sleep. And Kevin is a heavy sleeper. So, Andy had to knock at the door for far too long before Kevin woke up and let him back in, and then was annoyed at Andy for disturbing his sleep. After hearing that story, I decided to ask about the open wound rule, and I honestly wish I hadn't. One weekend, Andy had gone home for the weekend, which is in a city a few hours from my university. While he was away, Andy received a text from Kevin, asking if he could borrow Andy's duct tape. Andy agreed, and heard nothing from Kevin until he came back. Upon returning to his dorm room, Andy walked in on Kevin standing over the trash can with his back to the door, and wincing/moaning in pain. When Andy looked, Kevin was peeling a layer of duct tape off of his finger. From what I understand, Kevin had a wart on his finger and tried to use the classic home remedy of using duct tape to cover the wart. But Kevin wrapped duct tape around his entire finger and, I guess, somehow managed to mess it up, because when he tried to remove the duct tape, it certainly took the wart off, but it also took off a decent chunk of skin around the entire circumference of his finger where the duct tape was. Kevin then proceeded to try and wave his bleeding, raw finger in Andy's face, to which Andy threatened to vomit on him if he didn't stop. Over the next few days Kevin kept trying to show Andy how his wound was healing, despite Andy's constant protests. As soon as I picked my jaw up off the floor after hearing that story, Andy told me the reason he wanted to meet with me again was because, surprisingly, Kevin was still at it, and nothing had changed. In fact, Andy had received a warning from his professor because Kevin tried to talk to Andy in the middle of a quiz. The professor told him that if it happened again, he would fail, kind of a dick move for the professor, but whatever. Andy wanted a room change, and as much as I would have loved to give him one, our normal room change process is closed due to COVID. However, I talked to my boss, and he told me to at the very least attempt to mediate a conversation between the two of them, and if all else fails, we could initiate an emergency room change. So, I asked them to meet me in my room that weekend at a specific time. I get a knock on my door 5 minutes early, and I check my peephole and see none other than Kevin standing outside my door. Alone. So, I reluctantly open the door and let him in. I begin by asking him how things have been in the room, not wanting to take sides too early. Kevin proceeds to tell me that things are great, and he's having no issues. So, I point out that it seems like his roommate has been having some issues, and he just says, yeah well, none of them are really that big of a deal. Right away I'm blown away at the audacity, but I try to press a little further, reminding him that he has to share the room, and that Andy is clearly uncomfortable. He then proceeds to tell me well, I think Andy is just making stuff up and exaggerating to get his own room. Before I have a chance to respond, Andy knocks on my door and I call him in to join us. It's here that I learn that Andy is a freshman, as I expected, but Kevin is a junior. So, I guess maybe the people in housing are Kevin's too for putting these two in the same room together. Not only that, but Kevin has had his last two roommates from his last 2 years of college move out in the middle of the semester. He claims they were both for unrelated reasons, but the best part about the old room change process is that the RA didn't have to be involved at all. If you were having roommate issues, and your roommate was just so bad that you didn't want to deal with your RA trying to convince you to work it out, you could just come up with another excuse to leave the room. Worked almost every time. Andy proceeds to try and voice his concerns to Kevin about issues in the room, and then brings up the fact that his professor gave him a warning because of the aforementioned quiz kerfuffle. Kevin then looks Andy dead in the eyes and says, I think you're lying, I don't think that really happened. You're just making that up to get your own room. We were speechless, and then finally, I told Kevin off for being such a dick. I had tried to be patient up until that point, but I'd had enough. I basically told Andy I would be in contact about getting him that room change and sent them both on their way. We did, by the way, manage to get Andy into his own room. And because of COVID, he was able to move into one of the rooms that just happened to have been left empty on my floor, so he's still my resident. Thankfully in the few days it took to get Andy out, nothing happened. But that was mostly because they were too annoyed with each other to say anything to one another, so that's it. Sorry this was so long and that it doesn't have a more satisfying ending. Unfortunately, showing an open, bleeding wound to your roommate isn't quite as punishable as underage drinking or smoking marijuana in the building. This was already really long, so I won't add any more to it, but let me know if you guys enjoyed this, and maybe I'll tell you about the flyer fiasco that's still happening with Kevin as we speak. Purple and Orange 1522 posted. It still baffles me that sharing a room when you move out to university is the norm in America. I would have hated it regardless of how good a roommate I got. Anatomic kill, Fox replied. He's making this up to get his own room? The Kevin death protest too much. I'd be curious to see if Kevin had the room to himself after the previous roommates moved out. Sounds like Kevin wanted to torture Andy until he left, and make it sound like Andy's fault, Solved Identity replied. I've been entirely unlucky with roommates to the point that they are a threat to my body and mind in the worst and nastiest ways. I can't even invite over someone of the opposite sex because they smell rotten and have nothing but disregard and contempt in their heart. There needs to be some means of rescue for good people like me who are forced into situations like this where I am constantly influenced by the worst kind of individual in the worst ways. How am I supposed to stop myself from developing the bad habits they force upon me? And why? Why do people defend this revolting, miserable, crazy person I live with? Certain people are enabling him. It's not like any of you could help unless you can start a system of relief for people in dire need of saving from the bad roommate every day slowly ruining their life, Gadgetman_1 replied. This Kevin is a pampered little twat. He's used to getting his own way, and to be the center of attention. My guess is that he's an only child, and his mother doted on him every waking moment. Badhux99 posted. A lot is due to a difference in culture between who goes to college in the respective countries too. Until recently, most children in the United States never had an individual room of their own or any privacy during childhood. You go to the suburbs in the United States and look at all those three-bedroom tract homes, and realize that in that era, the 1950s, they often had 5 or 6 kids. The Brady Bunch was almost a documentary. Other than the fact that they had a maid, nobody in those three-bedroom tract homes could afford a maid. Well, in these three-bedroom homes the parents had one bedroom, the girl children had a bedroom, and the boy children had a bedroom. There were no private rooms anywhere. No privacy at all. And this was the primary feeder for state universities, middle-class people in three-bedroom tract homes. So, paying for a private room at a state university was almost unheard of. Everybody was used to living with roommates, albeit sibling roommates, so why spend twice as much money for a private room? Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom until recently, the only people in higher education were children of the privileged classes, the wealthier merchant classes and the aristocrats. These children were raised in large homes, often with servants, and of course had their own bedrooms in those large homes. Sharing a bedroom would have been thought of as appallingly common and beneath them. And this attitude carried over to the universities that these children attended. Only commoners would actually share a room. Kevin story number 2. Posted by you/the real foray trip. Kevin's experiment. Kevin was once a little boy. One day, he learned about bulletproof glass. Oh, cool. Kevin thought, I wonder if we have that kind? But how do I see? Instead of thinking to ask his Ivy League parents, one of which currently teaches college astronomy and physics, Kevin went, oh, I know. If bulletproof glass can stop bullets, it can stop anything. So, he took a fire log, went outside his garage, and with all his little strength, chucked it through the garage door window. His father came down, shocked, and immediately gave Kevin quite a spanking. Afterward, Kevin was asked why on earth he did that. I wanted to see if it was the kind of glass that broke, replied Kevin. Later on in life, Kevin would accomplish such feats of intelligence as refusing to poop for a solid week so he didn't have to spend time pooping when he could be playing games or drawing, sending the head joint of his flute into his bedroom window. Yes, he did it twice, when swinging the instrument around like a lightsaber, and thinking he's clever when posting stories about himself on Reddit. Edited because holy shit, my first silver I think, thank you. And because I got the timeline a little mixed up. Also, to emphasize that, yes, Kevin was a little boy, but there was still no excuse, Rennie22 commented. Refusing to poop for a solid week. OP replied to Rennie22. I shit you not. Mixed up. Also, to emphasize that, yes, Kevin was a little boy, but there was still no excuse. Kevin story number 3. Posted by you/cry alternative 4534. Kevin rear-ends me, says it's my fault, wants me to pay to fix my car. I'm currently in high school and my fellow classmates are good drivers for the most part. The road which I take to get out of the school lot has a limit of 20 meters per hour as well as a stop sign to exit school. I was stopped at the stop sign, waiting for a car on the main road to pass, then bam. Someone came barreling down the otherwise quiet school road and rear-ended me, while I was stopped at a stop sign, and I was at the stop sign for a solid 30 seconds. So, in my initial angry, I give him the finger, then we both pull into a quit side road. I made up my mind to apologize for that, but he speaks first and say, why didn't you go? I was taken off guard instantly, then I had to process his verbal diarrhea. Then I said I was stopped at a stop sign. Who knew people stop at the big red signs that say stop? After we both call our parents, mine say just get his parents' info and we'll take care of it, but his mom came down and I had to wait for her. So, I offered him a snack while we waited, tried to make small talk, but he was pissed. Then his mom gets there, and we share info, and at the end of that part. Then my parents get in contact with his, and turns out his dad is a used car salesman. So, he wants to have my car fixed at his shop, so a few days later we drive up my car, which has minor damages in the few thousands of dollars, to get it all fixed. Later that day the dad calls and says it will cost $3,000, but for him it cost half of that. So logically he says, so pay me a $750 and I'll get it fixed. He says that to my parents, who in turn ask is it truly his fault? I say you're damn right it is. They're paying for it out of pocket, so the insurance doesn't double, but they still want us to pay for half. That got me pissed. I have no big physical damage for the 25 meters per hour rear end other than my neck, which doesn't want to turn all the way. Yet it is still probably worth $1,000, And I can double their insurance, not to mention me telling school and making him lose his parking spot. Yet they have the audacity to make my parents pay half. That final event just happened, thanks for reading. I needed to vent, so I wrote this, Funesty commented. I tell them to fuck right off. And you have multiple witnesses that he hit you. I take him to court if you have to. Sounds like the guy's dad is a typical piece of shit used car salesman. OP replied. Sadly, I have no witnesses, and I haven't gotten an apology yet, so, yeah, if they don't pay up, I'm going to sue and press charges. 66 GT350 Shelby commented. First of all, you always call the cops whenever there's an accident, even if there's no apparent damage. That way you have an official report on file, with statements as to what happened. Second, whiplash injuries are no joke, you could have repercussions from that for years. Third, no one in their right mind would allow a party to work on their car that had a conflict of interest. That was an incredibly foolish thing to do. For all you know, that idiot who rear-ended you did it on purpose to drum up business for his dad. You have no reason to trust his work. Call the police, and then your insurance company. Your rates shouldn't be affected if you're not at fault.